Ian and Melody, thank you so much. Ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. I will now put the recommendation and it's on our screens. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Just want to then move into our local board input. There were 5 requests, none were declined. Our first one, and they know the rules in regards to speaking time. So the first one is Kaipātiki Local Board and John Gillen, the chair, and Melanie Kenrick, member. It's in regards to Chelsea Estate Heritage Park. I have got a mover and seconder. That will be Councillor Darby and Councillor Hills, respectively. And I'm just going to invite both John and Melanie to present the local board input. Tēnā kōrua to you both.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko John Gillen ahau, no Kaipātiki ahau. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Committee, for allowing Melanie Kenrick and myself to present to you today on behalf of the Kaipātiki Local Board on a topic that is very close to our hearts and the culmination of decades of work. So do we have the presentation there, please? Thank you. Before we begin, we'd like to extend a huge thank you to the staff who have done a lot of investigative work on this on our behalf, reviewing legal aspects and historical information, and for creating a framework for assessment. They've kept in touch with the local board and given us several updates along the way. Thank you. But unfortunately, we don't agree with their conclusions, which we will get to later. Next slide, please. Many of you will be familiar. Many of you will be familiar with this view of a green oasis across the harbour, visible from much of inner Auckland. This headland is already a regional jewel, and what we are proposing to the committee is for much of this area to become a regional park. Next slide, please. This map shows the entire headland. The green areas are the 3 local parks that we're proposing to amalgamate into a regional park: Kauri Point Centennial Park, Chatswood Reserve, and Chelsea Estate Heritage Park. The red area to the left is New Zealand Defence Force land, and the orange area further to the left is Kauri Point Domain, both of which could potentially be added to the park in the future. Next slide, please. As much as we'd love to be able to take the credit for this proposal, the idea has been around since at least 1997, when Chirpa was formed and a campaign began to purchase land from Chelsea, Sugar, and amalgamate it with other parks to form a regional park. After much fundraising, the land was purchased with contributions from ASB Communities Trust, Auckland Regional Council, North Shore City Council, and the central government, and in 2009 was established as Chelsea Estate Heritage Park. However, despite this funding from across Auckland and New Zealand, Chelsea was established as a local park and not a regional park. At this time, the council also signed up to an agreement to fund the maintenance of the park up to a high level of service. And we've had advice from council's legal team, which I can't go into here, although it'll be available to you. But needless to say, the local board is finding it difficult to achieve council's legal obligation within our limited budget for that high level of service. Next slide, please, and I'll hand over to Melanie Kenrick.
So recently, when the PACE committee consulted on the regional management plan for parks, for the regional parks, this document provides a vision for the future of regional parks. And for this reason, both Chelsea, Chirpa, and also the Kaipātiki Local Board provided a submission on why we believe it should become a regional park. Now, some of the reasons are it has the most beautiful panoramic views of the Waitemata Harbour, Auckland Harbour Bridge, the CBD, right up to the Waitakere Ranges. At some point, Auckland is going to have tourists return to the city, and this would provide sort of an iconic visitor experience. There are extensive English estate parklands and picturesque lakes. It's also a park with a cultural story that reflects a lot of the human activities. On Kauri Point, there is an existing pa Now, the North Shore, we don't actually have an extensive number of PAs. There's one very significant one under the Harbour Bridge, which unfortunately, because it's had the Harbour Bridge sort of built over it, it hasn't allowed maybe sort of the amount of respect that it deserves. So Kari Point has a significant Maori pa. There's the early colonial history with the establishment of the sugar works and cottages. These are all Category A listed heritage sites. There's evidence of gum digging and also the military site further up. And then if you go right up to Hellier's Creek, there's evidence of kari milling that used to take place up there. The heritage cottages could be used for ranger accommodation or visitor information. There's huge economic benefits that could be gained from Chelsea, both in tourism and revenue potential. There's educational opportunities. I could imagine there's opportunities to learn about biodiversity. There's a range of different ecological environments down there. There's been, I think, about 50 different recordings of various birds in the bush. There's extensive walking, trampling, cycling opportunities, as well as water-based opportunities. Chelsea Bay is a beautiful sheltered bay that could be used for paddleboarding. It's also got access to the Waitemata Harbour, where there's often you'll see some people doing kite surfing out there. There's unrivaled biodiversity and wildlife opportunities. People have long talked about the potential for kiwi to be introduced into parts of this bush. It's an important ecological corridor which supports wildlife across Auckland. It's often used as a stop-off point for birds who travel between the islands and also Waitakere ranges. It's also a park that's accessible by public transport. There's a short walk and there are tracks that go down to from the Birkenhead Township down to the park. Chelsea Sugar, in fact, have actually talked about the possibility of opening up the wharf and the possibility of ferries being used and increasing the access to the park through that option.
Sorry to interrupt. This presentation has reached 5 minutes.
Okay. A park that's accessible to Auckland's population growth. We're expecting huge population growth both in Auckland and also around the Albany areas. It has the opportunities for financial partnership. Both, you could look at Chelsea Sugar Works. The park has a history of attracting philanthropic donations. I'm sure the Auckland Foundation might be also interested in this as an opportunity. Including Chelsea within your network of regional parks would help you meet many of the challenges you've already identified within your draft report. So looking at some of the problems that have been identified within this report, the plan notes that in order to provide for a growing population, purchase of more regional parkland will be desirable. Population growth is planned to be concentrated around Auckland and Albany and Northwest. So this proposal does not require any further land to be purchased. The plan also notes that radical changes are needed in both how we access regional parks and the emissions created from visiting regional parks. Our proposal would provide a regional park that is more accessible to the population than most existing regional parks, meaning less carbon emissions. The plan notes...
Sorry to interrupt again. The presentation has now reached 6 minutes.
Okay. The proposal offers the opportunity for Aucklanders to access regional parks through walking, boating, cycling or public transport. And there's also huge opportunities for recreational development. I'll pass it over to you, John.
John, can you just give us an indication as to how long you got left or whether you're wrapping up now, please?
Yeah, my apologies. Could we please have an extension of time just by a couple of minutes? I just want to touch on the actual the assessment that you'll be receiving this afternoon.
I'm happy to move an extension of time.
And happy to second, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. So look, John. Yep. If you just go ahead with
I'll
it.
go as quickly as I can.
Thank you.
So next slide, please. These are just pretty pictures. So this afternoon, you may hear from staff that Chelsea doesn't make the cut for a regional park or is inconclusive. However, we note that the assessment has been done primarily on only Chelsea and not the 3 parks combined, which may alter the findings. The first issue that has been they've touched on is that the Chelsea State Heritage Park is impacted by the ongoing operations at the Chelsea Sugar Factory. We disagree. The entire park and Chelsea Sugar property are together listed as a Category 1 historic place. The heritage nature of the factory adds to the aesthetics, vista and history of the park. Chelsea Sugar allows park visitors to access their land, including the playground and car park. Chelsea Sugar takes a keen interest on the development and upkeep of the park. When the 3 parks are viewed as a whole, the factory takes up a small amount of the headland. The second issue they identified is that Chelsea has limited recreation opportunities. Again, we disagree. The 3 parks together have a large network of tracks of varying difficulty, as well as ponds, open grass areas, recreation and picnicking, a large sandy beach in Kendall Bay, scenic lookouts and a connection to Chelsea Bay. There are also heritage features and an artwork. The next issue they identified is that Chelsea is predominantly used by the local board's residents, but the research actually showed that only 40% of visitors came from the Kaupaki local board area, which is not a majority, and that 40% came from further afield in the North Shore and Waitakere. And regardless of that, the 3 parks are currently local parks and not promoted as a regional park. So it is to be expected that many visitors are local, and it is a conclusion that is likely to be reached for any prospective regional park. With many prospective regional parks not attracting any visitors, the next issue is that visitor infrastructure is insufficient to cater to Auckland-wide catchment. This will be the case for any prospective regional park. However, the Chelsea Cottages and Manager House have the scope to be repurposed from tenanted houses to visitor infrastructure, heritage attractions, ranger accommodation, or accommodation for overnight park visitors. There is space around the toilet block for expansion if required. There is space to expand or upgrade the car parks if required, and there is grass space that could be enhanced with barbecues and park furniture if required. And the last issue is that the reserve is not used to host major events. It is true it is not currently used for events other than private weddings. However, it does have the space to be used for events, and applications for such have been received in the past. Final slide, please. We'd just like to again extend a thank you for having us here today, and we really hope that you do give this significant decision thorough consideration, and that we will soon have a new regional park in the heart of Auckland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thanks, Melanie. Look, I'm going to go out to questions, and I know I should have put the recommendation to extend the time. But look, I'm going to go to the part-time, make it short and sweet, please, because we've still got 4 more local boards to present. Councillor Watson, followed by Councillor Walker, and then Matua Kake.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. A question to you, John. A very good presentation from both you and Melanie, and it goes to that key point you made on the assessment. I'm looking at the map of the very substantial headland here. So I just want to reiterate the point that your proposal would combine the Chelsea Estate Heritage Park, which is bounded by the Kauri Point Centennial Park, which actually goes up into Chatswood Reserve, and across to Kauri Point Domain, leaving the New Zealand Defence Force. So looking at the map, that essentially amounts to all of that headland once the New Zealand Defence Force land is included. So that may or may not be a given, but certainly that key point that you mentioned in terms of the extent of the land here involves all those 3 existing parks, plus the Chatswood Reserve, and at some point, conceivably, the New Zealand Defence Force. Is that correct?
Almost. So Chelsea State Heritage Park, Kauri Point Centennial Park and Chatswood Reserve are the 3 that we're asking for today to be amalgamated and turned into a regional park. Then there's the scope in the future to also add the defence land if that ever becomes available, and then Kauri Point Domain on the other side of the defence land. So this will be the first step towards achieving the entire headland as a regional park as well.
Okay, thanks for making that clear.
Councillor Darby to close it off.
Sure. Look, thanks, John. Thanks for your. Would you suggest looking desirable to defer this item pending further consideration. Having heard what you've said and taking into account other regional parks, I mean, for example, Shakespeare Regional Park has the defence land next to it that, while it's not part of the regional park, still offers many of the conservation values. So would you suggest that at the very least we defer this item, or is there any other variation that you would voting for these officer recommendations at this time?
Thank you, Councillor. That is a decision for the committee, but of course the local board would dearly love to see this as a regional park. So you may need to take some advice on staff on how to respond to this report. Deferring may be the answer, but we would urge you not to agree with the officer's recommendations at this stage, please. If that means further investigation, then that's what it means. If you're able to declare it a regional park today, then that would be fantastic. But we would support something in that direction, please.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. The other question that I would put is, yes, there is significant support from the local board. I would venture to say that you would have overwhelming support from Aucklanders. Have you had any opportunity to gauge that at this point?
No, but the staff did do some consultation on that. What I can tell you is that we have support from Chirpa, which is the volunteer group at Chelsea Estate Heritage Park, and also we have support of the volunteer group that acts in the other two parks as well. And I believe we do have the support of the public as well.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Matua Kake.
Yeah, kia ora. Councillor Walker's question was leading into where I want to go to, and that's just to ask you, kia ora, John and Melanie, thank you for your presentation, and what a beautiful part of Tāmaki Makaurau. What a beautiful part of Auckland. And my question is around your relationship with iwi, in terms of getting some of this over the line and your relationship with iwi. Could you comment on that? And also, you know, it's Councillor Walker brought it up as well in terms of future intentions around the army base and the acquisition of that. And I just wanted to know, what's the history there? Was that acquired under Public Works Act, or do you know?
Kia ora. I'm afraid I can't comment on how the Defence Force land was acquired. I can't recall that at the moment. As far as our relationship with iwi, on this particular issue, we have not discussed that directly with iwi. However, the staff have done, and the results of that is in the agenda report that you have in front of you today. There were some slightly different views from the different iwi, but overall, I believe that they would like to see what is best for the park, and if that means to go ahead with a regional park, then they would support that. But there's a bit more detail in the report in front of you.
Yes, I read that, but it's about, I think building a closer relationship, if you want to get this over the line, is important, which is why I'm raising it, and even more so with the future development around potential around the army base. You know,
I acknowledge it. Thank you.
This Public Works Act stuff, it's a whole different game, as you know.
Kia ora, Matua. Councillor Darby, to close this part off, bearing in mind there's another local board who's going to be talking on the same issue. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Chair. Kia ora korua, Melanie and John. Thanks for that. Hey, look, I'll be quick there. Just following up on Member Kake's line, that was my question too. So in arriving at the board's position, it was in the absence of engagement with the 12 Mana Whenua tribes that show an interest here, and then the staff have actually, in building this report, have made contact. So are you confirming, John, that there is no relationship with the 12 Mana Whenua in arriving at your board view?
That is partially correct, yes. We haven't directly engaged with Mana Whenua on this particular issue. We do on other issues, of course, and we have met recently on Little Shoal Bay issues, but on this particular one we haven't. This has come about now because of the recent consultation that this committee has undertaken on the reserve management plan for your regional parks. So we took the opportunity to submit on that. So what we really wanted to do was to find out, just to put the idea on the table. What we were hoping was that you would actually include it in your draft plan to go out for consultation, and then we would hear from the wider public on that and mana whenua at that stage as well. But I understand that's not how the process has worked out. But look, we are happy to take this to mana whenua as well. We would like to hear what the committee here has to say too.
Okay, and I do note that one is relatively comfortable, their very words. So look, and two have responded at this stage, but they're really under a lot of pressure. Very quickly with the balance of the questions, and I'll allow yourself and Melanie just pick these up. This is a reversal of the subsidiarity requests that we normally ask for. This is taking it up and away from communities. So you might like to comment on that and any possible risks. And the other one, John and Melanie, is the Kaipātiki local board and the community, if this was to proceed and become a regional park, my expectation is the patronage going there would be far, far greater. Is the board and the local communities, and especially local neighbours, do you think that they would be open to quite significant growth in patronage coming into the park? I'll leave the questions there, Chair, and thank you, John and Melanie.
Thank you, Councillor. The local board wants what is best for this park, and what is best for this park, we believe, is for it to be a regional park, and we think it deserves to be a regional park, and it has been a long campaign for it to be a regional park. So we would like the opportunity there for it to become a regional park. We understand that there would be an increase in patronage, and that has already happened to extent when the Chelsea Sugar Factory opened up its cafe. There's been a greater number of people going down there, and we've been upgrading tracks and so forth to accommodate that, and we're looking at a car park there as well. So look, we understand that. We understand there may be some changes in policy and that, and we're prepared to work through that with yourselves. The local groups are prepared to work through that as well. So we acknowledge there will be some changes, but what is best for the park in the long term, we believe, is for it to become a regional park.
Can I just add in there, Chris, that I think it's an opportunity to have a little bit of a vision about how we actually, if hypothetically Chelsea were to become a regional park, could it be designed so that it's, primarily accessible by public transport? Could we actually put some things in there? I mean, it will be a good opportunity for Birkenhead businesses, and there are some downsides, as you have highlighted, that we have been aware of. But I think that there's an opportunity with a bit of vision to actually, look at the needs that have been highlighted in your plan and actually tailor the park to meet those needs. I mean, it could sort of address the issue of not enough parks accessible by the community for, the disabled people or an ageing population, and how do we make it so it's only accessible by public transport?
Okay, thank you both. Thank you, Councillors, Independent Māori Statutory Board. The recommendation has been moved and seconded. I will put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Move on to, thank you both.
Thank
you. Move on to Rodney Local Board 6.2. Got the Chair, Phelan Pity and Louise Johnston. Milwaukee Silver Day Community Needs Investigation. It will be moved by Councillor Watson and Councillor Cashmore. So I welcome both Phelan and Louise.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it really quick. Victoria's got a presentation with some of the detail. So I guess we're in the unusual position of coming along, and I think it's the first time I've ever done this, where there's a report being presented and we're not happy with the way that it's been put together. And we're here to request that you consider perhaps knocking back this report and getting staff to go back and have a careful look at how it's been put together. The primary overall concerns that we've got with this is that particularly in Rodney, it hasn't included the entire future urban area. It's cut across it. So there's a large chunk of future urban growth area that hasn't been included. councillors will probably have seen that memo that came out to us last week where it talked about growth. I see that Rodney Local Board is sitting just behind Papakuran, 21% growth last year. This particular area that this piece of work covers is one of our fastest growing areas and is also going to be one of our biggest. The other issue is that as you discussed yesterday, I believe it was, or perhaps it's over the last few weeks you've been discussing this, is the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. We all know what's coming with that. And so a lot of these surrounding areas, particularly around Whangaproa and Silverdale, are actually going to have increased density of urban development. And I don't believe that staff have really taken this into consideration. And there are a number of other issues which Victoria will highlight, but as a board, we're not happy with the way this report has been put together and the quality of the information in it. That's all I've got. I'm happy to take questions, or you might want to leave it till Victoria's done her presentation.
Bearing in mind, Phelan, that we've got about 3 odd minutes left, I'll get
Sure.
the presentation done, and then we'll go into partai after that.
Cool. Well, I've finished. That's me done.
Yeah. So Victoria, all yours. Or is it Louise? I think Louise, you're going to.
No, it's
no,
Victoria.
It's Victoria.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking at the chat bar, Phelan. So is that you, Victoria?
Yeah, I do have a presentation, Mr. Chairman. A slideshow.
Okay, Maya's just made you a presenter. That's why I mentioned earlier.
Right.
So you could then share it and do that from there.
Okay. Sorry, this will just give me a minute. Apologies.
Victoria, the only option that you have is to send the presentation to Maya, and then Maya can do it from her.
Yeah, I can do that right now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How long is the presentation, Victoria, please?
It should take 5 minutes.
Hopefully shorter than 5 minutes, Victoria.
Sorry.
Mr. Chair, are there two boards? Sorry, Mr. Chair, are there two boards presenting? Do they get time each?
Well, that's yes, they do with the two boards. That's why I'm hoping that this particular presentation will hopefully go into the next local board, but they still have their time allocation.
Yeah, well, I think we were hoping to do it. We'll do questions together, but I think our presentations just separately, if that's okay, Mr. Chair. So I've sent my presentation to Maya. Hopefully she can pick it up from her end.
Yeah, so just to let everybody know, the process will be the next local board, and then hopefully that'll tie in the presentation that we get now, will tie in with their presentation, but they will be given 5 minutes as well.
Wonderful.
Victoria,
right.
It's on there. Can you see it now?
Yes, happy to start if that's okay.
Bye-bye.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Next slide, please. So this report's premise is simple. Based on how we know facilities are used, i.e. the formula in the Community Facilities Network Plan, do we judge whether we have enough capacity in existing leisure and community facilities in a particular area to meet current growth? And will we have enough capacity over the next 30 years? However, Local Board has consistently pointed out serious errors within this report. Many of these errors were repeated in new iterations of the study and are still in the report in front of you. Based on these basic errors, the Local Board is left to question the conclusion in this report. On page 7, you'll see the beautiful privately owned Northern Arena mentioned is able to provide alternative aquatic facilities. What has not been mentioned is that this pool is not for recreation. It is a performance pool. Also, casual visits cost $25 per person. This facility is not at all like our council pools, and the owners show no intention of wanting it to be used that way. Again, on page 7, you'll see 4 privately owned venues for hire listed. The local board has pointed out that 2 of these venues on the list have been sold and at least 1 out commissioned currently. And then leisure centres. A leisure centre should cater for 18 to 40,000 residents according to the Community Facilities Network Plan guideline, which is on page 8 of the report. Yet, Stanmore Bay Leisure Centre already serves 45,000 people from the older areas of the Hibiscus Coast. So it already exceeds the capacity well before we even look at using it for the residents in the study area. Another quick example demonstrating the quality of the evidence is that our local schools were suggested to cover gaps in indoor and outdoor recreation. The 4 schools identified in the study have faced massive jumps in the role in the last 5 years, which after all is why we're conducting the study. The school facilities data in this report comes from an audit from 5 years ago. The local boards would ask that given that this is just 4 schools, that staff resurvey these 4 before concluding that there is available space. One positive note, however, is the note about Orewa Library. It is good that this has been flagged as a need of renewal. A roof that leaks in every rainstorm in a library is not a good thing. Next slide, please. The Rodney Local Board covered the huge growth in population beyond what is expected. We'd like to point out some of the finer detail behind that growth that is masked by the total population figures. For example, there are 2 big growth areas that are just outside of the study area, but they are in the catchment of the area of the facilities that Silverdale, Milldale and Millwater residents will use. Red Beach and Arran Hills, pictured above, both have sprung up within the last few years. The residents shop, play and use facilities in Silverdale and Orewa. The lack of up-to-date population figures mean that this report hasn't included this growth, but it is thousands of new residents. Another development that is pictured in the bottom is the Botanic, one of the largest, if not the largest retirement villages in Auckland. It was developed as a result of a plan change, and it's so big it has its own childcare facility. These developments introduce a new demographic to the area of lower-priced terraced housing and retirement villages. This major change in demographic has not been featured in this report, but the residents are already there. Next slide, please. We've cut out an excerpt from page 30 of the Community Facilities Network Plan. It demonstrates the part of key elements that need to be met to be tagged for funding. The highlighted sections are those that could easily be said to be met in this area. Therefore, both local boards feel that it is important this report be redone. There are many gaps in this report. Facilities included that are not suitable and facilities not included that may be suitable, and others that are mentioned that we cannot trust data on, such as the leisure centre and schools. For example, the local board expressly mentioned that there is a 3.5 million capex renewal budget set aside for an informal recreation facility in Silverdale, something that should be factored into the community provision. However, this has not appeared in any of the reports. We would ask that the team that produced this report collaborate both with Rodney and the Hibiscus and Bays local boards and start this investigation afresh. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I've got questions in about 30 seconds, so if there's no further comment from the local board, I'll get into our partai. So Councillor Newman, followed by Councillor Dalton, then Councillor Watson, and I will then put the recommendation. Kia ora.
Oh, look, thank you, Chair. Look, and thank you to Phelan and Victoria for the presentation. Chair, I wondered if I can just get clarification. I know that Claudia is on the call. In relation to item 20, I've read that particular item, and I share some real concerns about the methodology and the rigor in relation to the investigation that led to the assumptions in the report. Given what we've just heard, and given what I've just said and what I suspect will come up later on, I'm just wondering, Claudia, as the authoriser of this report that's on the agenda, if this particular report should possibly be pulled at this point rather than it coming up for a discussion, because I'm not hopeful that this particular item, given what we've heard today and given what is clearly the gaps in the report, given the methodology or the limits in the methodology that have been applied, that this report is actually appropriate for this agenda at this time. And I wondered if you could comment.
Councillor Newman, I will comment on this as a political decision, and that is it will go through to the agenda item, and then we will have a discussion in regards to whether it gets pulled, whether it gets passed, approved, but we will have that discussion at the agenda item. Kia ora.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I hope that the senior officers are available, because I don't want the policy analyst alone to be sitting there taking some questions on this. I'll need the senior officers to support. Thank you.
Yeah, all the officers will be available for both reports, and in particular this particular one. So they will be available when we get to the item. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll have questions for the report too. I read it, and it was around the questions of methodology. So to the board, both boards, and good collaboration. The methodology, when reading the report, does not indicate that there were site visits or conversations held with some of those facilities, perhaps that are non-council owned. Are you aware if they took place, if they did take place, to get a good assessment of whether you can use schools, pools, or and you gave a good example, Victoria, of the pool that charges $25 and isn't for community use. That was in the report. So are you aware if site visits took place? Okay, thank you. I'll leave the rest of my questions to when the report comes. But
I can just quickly comment on that. We asked that question as well, and we were told there were not the resources or funding to do that. And as Victoria's pointed out, it was only talking about a few schools. So this was not done as part of that report.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. A question for you, Victoria, in respect of your comments on the schools in the first instance and the accuracy of information. Two questions, really. One, why is Wentworth College included in that catchment? It's 16 kilometres at least away from Silverdale and Millward. It's a little private school in Gulf Harbour. So I'm assuming that's not in the catchment at all, but it's quoted there as providing indoor courts. And secondly, in respect of the other schools quoted, like Kingsway, with a local board, for instance, aware that they're essentially the two Kingsway schools are gated schools. You can't get into them outside of school hours. They're locked off to the public. So I'm just curious to know as to the integrity of the information in terms of public access in light of both those instances there as far as the schools go.
Yeah, so like you said, some schools were mentioned, some schools weren't. And there are real concerns around some of these schools being able to actually facilitate a community to come in and use their sports fields, their indoor courts and everything like that. But again, it was just a quick phone call. All it needed was a phone call to these schools to find out whether they could, update the information that they had put in the report of whether they could use the facilities or not. It was really disappointing to see that they hadn't even tried in that sense. But again, there's real concerns around safety, risk factors that schools have to consider to invite the community in. And then you've got after school activities. So it's this idea that you can use schools, I think is long gone, and I don't think it's even doable in this time. Hopefully that answers your question, John.
Yes, thanks. So just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. I mean, there was some negotiations with Kingsway School 4 or 5 years ago that came to nothing and didn't end all that amicably, to be honest. But I mean, if that's the historic data, then that's long out of date. So it'd be useful if that could be confirmed later. Thank you.
Kia ora, John. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. 6.2. All those I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you so much, Rodney Local Board. I'm going to move to 6.3. I'm hoping that there won't be that much said because of the combined Rodney and Hibiscus Bay's local board. But it will be moved by Councillor Watson and Councillor Walker. Now, Gary, I'm going to you, Gary, because we've seen the presentation. Gary, have you got any comments to make? And I know that the partai have been said, but I wanted to give you an opportunity. We've seen the PowerPoint, so I'm just going to leave it to you, Gary, and then I'll most probably put the recommendation because the partai have already been asked, but I'll leave that to you, Gary. Thank you.
Look, thank you, members. Our main concern is I've lived in the area for a long time, 50 years now. I'd like to think I'm only 45, but it ain't going to happen. And the development has been huge. We are growing like you wouldn't believe. And Phelan has a very strong point about the urbanisation that's coming into Arran Hills, Milldale, and the future for Dairy Flat area. They have to use our facilities. There's nothing there that's in place for the future. And the important thing is that if you can look really strongly at what investments can be done in more community facilities, it's going to take the burden off that area completely. And that's important because we are absorbing what we can now. I think we're at 50-something thousand for the Hibiscus Coast. Rodney is growing in that area, even though it's just across the road to Arran Hills. So please look at it favourably at what we can do to reassess it, find what facilities there are. A lot more capabilities of land that is available to actually build more items. And when the development comes for these developments, if you can look forward to where these future developments can be to allocate the pools, the community centres, the areas that can be used by not only our area, but Rodney area and the new Dairy Flat area that are in the process for the 10-year plan. It's really, really important. Otherwise, we're going to saturate it and our infrastructure won't handle it. So appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Now, Victoria, I know you put the PowerPoint in, but I'm just going to offer you any closing remarks, and then I'm assuming, apart from Councillor Hills, there'll be no other partai because we've gone through that with your presentation, Victoria. So any closing remarks from the local board before I hand it over to Councillor Hills for his partai?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I've said everything that I've needed to say and present on, so tēnā koe again.
Ka pai. Councillor Hills, partai.
Kia ora, Chair, thank you. And thank you to the chairs and members, deputy chairs, for speaking on this. I guess the question on a high level, apart from redoing the report, I guess, you know, when we have to balance up places like Waitakere, West Auckland, which have one pool for 300,000 residents, and I just wonder, is this about the long-term future? Because obviously we have to try and find provision for those current communities that are still well undercooked in facilities. Is this more about making sure we don't make the same mistakes again, or just about trying to I just guess the specifics, because we couldn't do it all anytime soon. Is it more about ensuring we're planning for the medium future? I guess I'm just worried about what the expectation or the ability we have right now.
Either
anyone? Yeah.
I'm happy to respond.
Phelan, can you hold on 2 seconds?
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So, Councillor Hills, I heard you say to anyone, but we are on the local board for Hibiscus and Bays.
Apologies. Yeah.
Sorry. So Gary, if you want to leave that to Phelan, I got no issue in regards to that. But like I said, we're on the item of Hibiscus and Bays. I don't normally get too pedantic, but I don't want to take the time off you, Gary, nor Victoria. So I'll leave that to you. And if Phelan wants to say it, that'll be your answer as well, Gary.
I think Phelan is basically going to say, look, we can't leave it much longer because, thank you, Councillor Hills, when you look at it, if we have if you look at the report, it was looking at a 10-year plan, then it would come to the local board, and then you've got to discuss and what the future plans will be. That could be another 5 years. You're looking at 15 to 20 years. I don't think we can wait that length of time. I think that, Phelan, can you just agree with me on that one? Thanks.
Well, what I was actually going to say, this isn't about swimming pools, so I don't think we should. The concerns that we've got are about the quality of the report and the information at the end of it. I don't think we should get hung up on whether this is about funding swimming pools. Those things are a long way away, but this has an impact on all types of community facilities funding over the next decade. So I wouldn't want councillors to think we're here because we're going to start spruiking for a swimming pool, because I know that is certainly not why we're here from the Rodney local board. We're just concerned that the quality of this report is poor and it will have very long-term implications on funding.
So we'll get to that discussion in regards to quality, in regards to the quality or not. That's a decision that we will end up making in regards to when we get to the item. Councillor Hills, any other part? I'm going to put the recommendation.
No, that was all. That was the clarification I needed. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next question.
Kia ora, Gary.
Cheerio.
Thank you.
We're moving to the next item, and we've got 6.4, Mangere, excuse me, Mangere Otahu Local Board, Malo Lava, Lo Fionga, Le Monga. Also, congratulations in regards to the journey in Parliament. So, Le Monga, it will be moved and seconded by myself and Councillor Collins, but I'll leave it open to you, Chair. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou, Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity just to present our very short presentation and then be in a position to take pārtai. Thank you. Councillors and local board chairs and members, just really wanting to present a viewpoint perspective from Mangere Otahu. Next slide, please. Yes, the background. So in 2020, under emergency budget, initially the local board, Mangere Otahu, we did support, given the constraint on finances. In May 2021, we subsequently rescinded our support, in particular of one of the reserves, and we requested PACE to consider the same. And we then presented August 2021. Next slide, please. The local board requested a copy of the hearings report to the final views to the PACE committee. Staff refused at that point, and then we refused to provide further recommendations or resolutions to the PACE committee. At that point also, we did have Councillor Alf and Councillor Whanana explain their position, and that's why I'm here today, and apologies from Tawana, or our Deputy Chair. Next slide, please. We do not dispute as a local board governing body as a decision maker in terms of reserve revoking. Hearings report is primarily, but not exclusively, for the benefit. And what I do want to point out is revoking of reserve and asset sales. We have had a number of kōrero with iwi and our communities locally, and we take all of those matters into consideration. So we do not dispute that. Next slide, please. So PACE committee, whilst what is important to our board is simply that we require the information so we can make an informed decision. We have been asked to provide views without the report, and we were informed by staff that once it's public, then the local board would receive a copy of that report. Although not specific, we do agree with the principles, which is pointed out. Local boards are part of governance structure rather than a stakeholder, and then access to information. And just on that, next slide, please. So what we're asking of the PACE committee today, and I've got a couple of reasons when I answer any pārtai, is what is the harm that we're seeking to avoid in providing highly relevant and important information to local boards. And the issue of reserve revocation is we are concerned that the current report, that the recommendation, which is further discussed by PACE, is to uplift the reserve status because it's no longer required. So we would oppose those recommendations that you will see further in your meeting. And is there a process that can be accommodated with a principle of giving giving local boards further information we need. So just for your information, members, myself and our Deputy Chair, we sat in on the hearings where one specific reserve, which was Ferguson Street, there was a strong case put forward. The hearings panel did put forward their recommendation to be considered, that the reserve, if it is not in the list of reserves, then it be considered for the family who've been caring for it since 1979. Subsequently, also, the other two reserves, iwi have provided their perspective in regards to why keeping those reserves in the council asset list is important to our local community. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy to take any partai.
Kia whawhai lava le maunga. And just to give some context, because I know that you mentioned the fact that Councillor Collins and I were at the local board meeting. Just to the committee members, the process was explained and understood by the local board that we are the decision makers, as in the PACE committee are the decision makers for the revocation of reserve status. And as a result, we will get the reports before we make our decision based on the recommendations from the independent commissioners. So that was explained to the board. Also, there was an email that I sent to the board, to both boards, in fact, both local boards in the Manukau ward, from Julie McKee, our hearings coordinator, and explain the reasons why the decision needs to come to PACE committee before it goes to the local board. I did explain to both local boards that once we end up getting it at our preprint agenda, is that I would share the result of the independent commissioner's decision with the relevant local boards if they requested, prior to it going out to the public agenda. So that's just some context to the reason why Le Maunga mentioned myself and Councillor Fessel going to our monthly local board meetings. Councillor Collins, partai.
Oh, thanks, Chair, and you've pretty much answered what I was going to ask, so I do appreciate that full and thorough a piece of sharing that you've just given us. But I wondered then if I could put the question to the chair, that given that particular process, which you both, I remember you outlined it very clearly at the local board meeting, and you did welcome a response prior to the public notification. Chair, I was wondering if that worked for you, if that was a process that you thought was enabled the local board to consider the information. It may have felt a little bit tight, but do you think that that was an idea that maybe got us around some of the kind of legal or regulatory parameters that Councillor Alf invited you to participate in, or get the information in front of you as soon as possible?
Thank you, Councillor Whanana, for the question. I guess, to be frank, is what we understand as local board, when reports are being considered by various committees and governing body, it's important to capture the views of the local board, and they may not be agreed to. We may have different opinions, and I'm hoping I'm answering your question correctly. It's important that because So just to give a bit more context, the growth that a number of other local boards at this time have mentioned, we're quite worried as a local board as to the impact on our local facilities, and we see the reserve revocations in Māngere in Otahuhu really something that we oppose strongly to. We've had a number of comments from iwi, our iwi engagement, and also our communities. And in particular, what the three reserves in this report, it is important for the local board to receive all information that we are privy to, so that we can make an informed decision, we can provide some recommendations. And at this point, staff withheld that. I know that it was the report was available through other sources, but in particular with local board business, when we are at a business meeting, it is important that A, we've considered the reports, B, that we have the opportunity to provide our own recommendations with the guidance from community and in particular iwi. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Councillor Whatanana.
Oh, that's absolutely fine. And I guess what I was trying to get at was just making sure that we've had some kind of process, which Councillor Alf tried to be, you've tried to be as amenable as possible, Councillor Alf, given the restrictions that were placed on that. So thanks for that. And I won't ask my second question, but I was going to ask if you could tell us a little bit about Ferguson Park, but I think you've touched on Ferguson Park and its value to the community. So thanks so much, Lemonga.
Thank you, Whanana.
Councillor Newman.
Sorry, yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. Good morning, Leomonga. So, Ferguson Park, that's 5R Ferguson Street, that correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, interestingly, I mean, I just wondered, I'm finding this whole thing to be a bit confounding. I mean, I've read the report myself, and I've got, officer comments in relation to one of the submitters here, to Mr. Sykes. It said, this property is not considered, etc., etc. Suggestions can be made onto the local board for consideration for other parks in the area. I don't know if you've seen that reference. What does that statement mean to you? I'm not quite sure how to interpret what I'm being told here, other than the recommendation is for revocation. The local board can go and sort this out and change its position. How do you interpret this?
So if I could just think about the statement from Mr. Sykes, is what the local board is doing, given the constraints and the levers that we've been advised with the reduction of revenue as the whole Auckland Council. The local board has, what we've undertaken is we're looking at all of the local parks, and I think what Mr. Sykes could be referring to is there could be a trade-off of other parks, small pocket parks, for example, small green spaces, rather than putting those up for asset sales. So from memory, he's asked us a number of questions. He's a very concerned resident in Mangere East, and the fact that this particular one in Ferguson Street has come up. I'm only assuming in the conversations that I've had offline with him is the real pushback against asset sales.
Thank you, Leomonga.
Leomonga, just one partai from me. Did you say in your presentation, your opening remarks, that you presented in front of the independent commissioners?
Yes, we were given the opportunity in that hearing just to provide a local board insight, whether we were in support, yes.
Yeah, whawhai lava. Look, there's no more partai Lemonga, so it's been moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Collins, so I'll put the recommendation whawhai te le lava. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Move on to next item, and that is 6.5, and where is it? 6.5, Whau Local Board. It will be moved by Councillor Mulholland and myself. So Jessica Rose, member of the Whau Local Board. Tēnā koe, Jessica, and I'll invite you to say what you need to say. Kia ora.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair, but I think you
I'm
and
on mute.
Jessica are on mute. Yes.
Yeah. Glad that wasn't only me. I was just saying tēnā koe and kia ora koutou, and thank you, Governing Board, for having me speak today. Sorry that I don't have a presentation. I didn't know I could put one together. I mean, I know I can put one together. I didn't know one was necessary for today. So we'll just have to paint a picture in our imaginations, if that's okay. I really could have put together quite a whiz-bang one as well, because it's quite a picturesque topic. So I'm going to take my agenda item as read on the play streets, and I just want to set the scene for why the Whau Local Board urge approval for the guidelines for play streets. Later in this meeting, there is going to be an item on play streets for the governing body's review, and I'm certain there'll be a lot more detail on what the guidelines outline and what they're asking for. But for our part as a local board, we'd like to communicate why. In Fo, we were grateful to be host to one of Wakakotahi Innovating Streets projects, a play street held in Whakawhiti Loop in Avondale. Residents were so thrilled about the trial being held in their cul-de-sac, and then the community outcomes experienced for them, their children's safety in play, connectivity with their neighbours, things that empowered them to go forward and care for one another, that they have asked for a second one. Well, no, they did ask for a second one. They'd like to have a third, I should say. Whakawhiti Loop is a reasonably new development with townhouses. People have smaller backyards and a lot of spaces dedicated to sort of double-storey or three-storey households, really circling road space in between, just to give a bit of a picture of what that space looks like. In Avondale, we are close to a city-bound train line, and because of that, we're facing the exciting prospect of significant housing intensification. In one lot, for example, one house will become 19. Across the road from that, 7 houses become 104. In town, our local town, 42 residences now become 500. This is great news for much needed housing. However, along with this, there isn't a correlated increase in spaces for community to use or children to play. I think everyone around this table is keenly aware of the finite limit of available land in our cities. That is, unless we consider, now and then, diversifying the space of the streets that we use for transit. I'm thankfully of an age that I can remember growing up in the 80s and 90s and having street parties at Christmas. In Beachlands, where I spent my late childhood, these were organised by neighbouring parents and usually meant some of the dads parked lengthwise across the street end, and we all ran across the street from house to house while everyone else talked and ate on the street berms. It was an equaliser for people from different backgrounds and norms, while we shared from what we had in each other's households. The centre of the road was a safe space for games under parental observation. People who sought to drive on the road this day would just turn back and go around. It wasn't a big deal. And some of you may even remember the movie Wayne's World, where the primary characters set a scene playing hockey across their street, which they regularly interrupt to let a car pass, and then recommence. The idea of playing outside in this space isn't a new one. Yet somewhere in the last 20 years or so, we've lost this neighbourhood aspect in our residential streets. When in a time of intensification, COVID restrictions and changing climate, we actually need it more than ever. I'd just like to reiterate that the key features of a play street are that it's resident-led and organised. There's short, regular road closures. It's free, child-led play. All neighbours are consulted and included. The road is legally and safely closed to through traffic. It is stewarded by residents. Car access can still happen at a walking pace. It is simple and normal. It doesn't have to be a street party. At Fo Local Board, we want to protect our community's well-being and right to public spaces now and into the future, especially regarding the great increases of intensification and pressure on our public spaces. So simply in closing, if I come back to Whakawhiti Loop, considering the success and enjoyment from that local community as a result of their play street activation, this community has asked if they can do this again. And the question that I put through is, what are we going to tell them? I'm happy to take any pate.
Look, thank you, Jessica. I've put the ask out to see if there was any pate, but nothing's come through. I think it's because it's self-explanatory in regards to the agenda item that we have. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. I'm going to wait for my 3-second rule to kick in, and then we'll move on. Yeah, no, look, Jessica, thank you so much. I'm going to put the recommendation that's moved by Councillor Mulholland and seconded by myself. So thank you again. Thank you for your advocacy. So I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Thanks, Jessica.